Happy People Read and Drink Coffee by Agnès Martin-Lugand. Lugand, one of those. So, what a title, right? Happy People Read and Drink Coffee. Love the stuff. Can't really go past a title like that. Unfortunately, the title, while not completely inaccurate, doesn't really reflect the reading experience. So way back in 2019 when I read this book, what I had to say was that this is an enjoyable, well-written little novel. Not quite what I expected from the title, because the title basically wasn't in the novel. The cover also suggests that the title is going to reflect what's in the story. Again, titles and covers, right? So the title references a literary cafe in Paris in which our leading lady Diane co-owns with her best friend Felix. But the problem with the book that I had, and why I gave it 3 stars back in 2019, and don't remember it all that well, to be honest, the cafe which intrigued me, and which was kind of why I bought the book, right? Well, they were not really present in the novel, and the story starts with the aforementioned Diane, who is a mess, having lost her beloved husband and child in a car accident. Her tragedy occurred a year prior to the beginning of the story, but she is still holed up in her apartment, a mess. She spends the day in pajamas, lives off her husband's life insurance because life choices, right? And has made a general career of being a train wreck. No judgment on the character. I'm sure that's a horrific experience. It's a rather over-dramatic way of coping with it, but each to their own, and she's a fictional character. I imagine that there are some people who don't do much better. Whatever. I couldn't really emphasize with her very much, but So then all of a sudden, I can't remember why, maybe she got nagged by friends or family or something. In order to derail her train wreck of a life, she decides to go off to Ireland and rent a tiny cottage there in the dead of winter. Because that's a sensible way of putting your life back on track, isn't it? Again, whatever rocks your boat. So she gets to this tiny cottage in winter in Ireland. Words fail me, and spends several weeks being combatant and dueling with her neighbour Edward. This solid enmity eventually slowly changes to a friendship and then into something a bit more than a friendship, but not really spoilers, and this isn't really a love story, which worked for me just fine. So despite the fact that I sound underwhelmed and maybe a bit cynical, and the 3 stars which I gave the story, it is actually a charming story if that's what you're after. Diane is easy to read and she's moderately easy to emphasize with once she gets out of her pajamas and starts having a life again. The writing is nice enough that you can read along for the ride, not think about it too much. You can have fun, and it's undemanding. Undemanding fun isn't a bad thing in a novel, right? It's got an added bonus that's a little bit hard to explain, because while the first part is set in Paris, or at least one very small, very untidy apartment in Paris, and while our main character Diane is French, and I believe the author is as well, the story isn't overtly French. So you know what can happen if someone who's Australian or English or American absolutely falls in love with France or Italy or Spain or wherever, and then they write a book in which their character is in this location. They go over the top to bring in all that love that they have for this foreign country, and as a consequence it can feel a tiny bit cringe at times. So this book does it just right, with enough hints and enough accent on Diane to make it real. It feels like a real thing, and possibly the way it's written makes her behaviour feel a little bit less psychotic than it would if it was an Australian that was being trying to convince went off the rails in that way. I don't know about English. Definitely not Australian. Anyway, so my only real regret about this book was that this cozy little story, the literary cafe with the adorable name and the lifestyle that I imagined seeing behind it, none of that exists. It appears briefly at the end of the novel, but in that point, it's really just a metaphor for Diane getting her life back together finally, because she goes back to Paris and has to tidy up the cafe, which is a mess because she hasn't been there. And that's it, pretty much. A mild metaphor. And I feel that's a shame, because this literary cafe where you can have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, or both if you like, and read books, I want that cafe to exist. I don't really care about the tumble down, cold Irish cottage. And I certainly didn't never really cared about the village or the neighbour. But still, for someone who wants this type of a story, a cozy little happy, comforting human interest, mildly contemporary fiction with mildly contemporary themes, this is a perfectly adequate book. You might enjoy it. I actually did enjoy it enough to remember it. I don't remember having read it on a regular basis like a book I really enjoyed, but if someone goes to Goodreads and likes my review, I would remember, oh yeah, that book. It's not like some of the books where I could swear black and blue that I'd never read it. Anyway, book, marvellous title, great theme that never materializes. Happy people read and drink coffee.